Welcome to Technology Tangents. We get leaders together to discuss the important tech of today, the implications for tomorrow. Our discussions are fun, lighthearted, and, well, frankly, opinionated, but hopefully gives you a sense of what matters, what to pay attention to, and what to ignore. Kevin, joining me here in the room. How are you today?
Doing really good. Excited to be here, middle of the week. So
I know. Should be a good one, right?
Should be a good
one. A little
one.
later than usual, so we'll see how the blood sugar holds up here. We'll find out. Jason, joining us from a fishing village somewhere in, South America, Africa,
North
Alaska.
Dallas,
Where do you do fishing, Jason?
No, this is my study in my new house. We've moved, and so I am still working through all the issues with the new house, like the electrician is here, and so hopefully I will have power throughout the entire podcast today.
Speaking of careers that will not be quickly automated by AI, electrician might be the way to go. Well, listen, true. I wanted to talk about first-party data today. This has been an ongoing topic for many, many years now. We've heard a lot from companies like Apple and Mozilla who have already sort of blocked third-party cookies. We've heard a lot of talk from Google about blocking this activity moving forward. As you think about the world of generative AI, the personalized experiences it can bring, certainly it is important to work through and figure out. In fact, I think, we've had this delay for more than 2 years now. Most recently, Google announced they're going to launch this sort of better, more privacy-preserving functionality that frankly restricts cross-site tracking. So maybe just to get started, Jason, I'm curious, maybe just walk us through a little bit of what are cookies, how do they work, what are they used for, and really what is the point with respect to privacy?
Well, I think most people will know that a cookie is just a file that's put on your computer by the website that you go visit, and what it has in it is whatever that website wants to put in it. But what normally websites put in it is an identifier of who you are and what your session is, so that when you come back to the site, there are still things in your cart. It remembers that you're logged in, all of those things. But just to take a step back and think more broadly around first-party data and for third-party data versus cookies is, first-party data is data that you actively collect through your own channels and you have permission to use, right? So that's typically through a website, through a mobile app, through a purchase. You provide your data to a company and they have a right to use it, at least to fulfill that service, right? If you order something, they have the right to use it to mail things to you. And so that's first-party data that you collect. Third-party data is data that you buy from a third party. Now, the third-party cookies are a way that those third parties collect that data. So you can imagine companies like LiveRamp and others, you can imagine you go to a website, that website can put a cookie, or in this case, a third party, in this case, LiveRamp puts a cookie. Now, typically that's restricted, right? Or in the past that's been restricted. The companies that do this have had some very clever ways to get around that. It's essentially what has happened for the last, 2 decades. That the web has been around, people have been able to kind of get around that ability for a third party to put a cookie on your site from a different web page. So you go to Credera.com, and Credera puts a cookie on your site, but we let some third party put a cookie on your site. So what happens then is, let's say that you're that third party, you get lots of sites to do this, and now you start gathering lots of data about, you, Kevin, you went to Amazon and you went to, this site and this site and this site, and then maybe you go to one and you make a purchase and you fill out a bunch of personal data. Well, now they're able to correlate you, Kevin, to all of this other activity that you've done on the web. And then they sell that data to companies, and that is the third-party data that we're talking about. And so, the first-party data is stuff you collect. Third-party data, third-party cookie going away or being cut off is what has got people scared that, like, okay, if we're not able to use these third-party cookies, we're not going to get any value or as much value out of these third-party data solutions. And so we've got to like figure out how to get the same level of value out of our first-party data.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so in essence, if you think about how companies are actually personalized experiences and targeting you with different ads, with different sort of opportunities at that moment in time, they're looking at your previous behavior. Maybe it's from that site from a previous session or other behavior from other sites. To your point, maybe you're researching an Italian vacation. You want to go to Italy, you want to check it out. You're looking all over tourist sites, places to go, airline sites, etc. Now when you show up to a hotel site, they probably can intuit then from that third-party cookie, if it was capturing data across all those other experiences, that you're looking at Italy, you want to book on these dates, and they can sort of tailor that experience towards you at that moment in time. Of course, that personalization is always in balance with privacy, because what you're effectively then surrendering is your entire viewing history across lots of different sites. And in theory, anybody could then subscribe to your point, LiveRamp or whomever, to buy that data back from them. And so that's really where the tension comes up, is how do you balance this sense of privacy in the regulatory compliance? And that's especially in light of regulations like GDPR, CCPA, et cetera. So I'm curious, Jason, like how are people thinking about that space then? How are they changing this? Is it just you can't do anything and only be first party? Are there still ways to bring this together, give those personalized experiences? What are your thoughts?
So if we start with like, what are those regulations? GDPR, CCPA, they're essentially a set of rules that say what you can and can't do with someone's data, really regardless of how you get it, right? Whether you got it first party because someone gave it to you or you bought it from a business partner, what can you use that data for? And more specifically, that you need to get permission to use it for those things. And so you probably see this all the time. You go to websites now and they're like, they ask you all these permission questions. Can we, do you want us to do this or that? And you also have to give what those regulations say is like, you can't use people's data for things you don't tell them you're going to do. And they get a right to consent to that, but they also have a right to ask you to change those consents and not do it anymore, or even forget you entirely, right? It's what GDPR calls the right to be forgotten. And so the idea of privacy is like that the companies will have your data either through you giving it to them or someone else, but that you get to control, right, what they use it for. Now, as it relates to the, what are companies doing, like the main thing that I think a lot of people are doing is working on putting in the systems to gather those consents and perform those opt-outs. Right? That is actually a huge thing we're doing, because until you get that, a lot of companies are afraid of the legal ramifications of continuing to do things like personalization with the first-party data without having people's consent. And so that is, it seems to be kind of step one for a lot of companies, is like, we need to get the right consents in place and the right mechanisms to have people opt out, so that we can go and then, the idea is we use this data to make a better experience, more personalization. And there is a lot of research that people, Vincent, you probably know this better than I do, but that people, when you can customize an experience, people like it a lot better. And so so it is valuable to use, but that's kind of the first step that people have been doing.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense coming out of GDPR, 2018, CCPA. Effectively, you do have to have these systems that allow you to track that data lineage downstream, right? Which is to say, like, you gave me some information about you. Now you don't want me to have it for whatever reason. How do I understand where that data is propagated within my systems? And that becomes rather complex, especially for organizations that haven't done great data governance historically.
Yeah, and who knows where it has all propagated to? That's actually the hidden challenge of getting some of those things, those foundational things to use that data in place. It's just figuring out where it has all been propagated to.
So I'm curious, Kevin, from your perspective as a business strategist, or from a business strategy standpoint, look, you have consumers who are certainly concerned about privacy these days. You also have consumers, to Jason's point, who want personalized experiences. How do you navigate that very narrow line?
Well, short answer is I don't know, but I think I'm going to add a couple more things into the consideration for us here this evening is, you guys were talking about, Jason's talking about companies are now collecting it. So our experiences on our sites is changing, right? You choose to accept some or all. Who actually takes the time to read the 10 different things that you can select out of, or other sites that aren't collecting or are changing your user experience, right? Obviously one of the common tactics right now is they're restricting the number of visibility on a screen or something like that, right? And unless you actually accept all, which then creates even a more negative user experience, in my opinion. Yeah, so I think that right now probably every company is trying to think about it differently and trying to, and we've talked about these themes before a little bit. How do you evaluate the potential lost revenue between what either selling the data, using the data for experience, the regulatory risk associated with not compliance, not tracking what that's going to look like, to what does a consumer want? And I actually think that the consumer may think they want security. I don't know how well we've actually done to say what that means in terms of like, well, sure, don't sell my data because I want to be aggregated into that. Or, I really don't like that you sold my data to that company because I really don't want to see this ad again. But I really like the fact that you knew that I was going to Italy. And so, and how does that work? Or, I really like the fact that I can have on-demand, AI-driven, type experiences that's based on historical. So I think consumers are going to not actually know what we want as we move forward. And we're going to have to get wiser in terms of how we probably customize our opt-ins and opt-outs. And then just like as we've now seen with passwords where, unless you use some sort of a password tool, right, we can't keep track of anything. Well, it's going to be the same scenario on this. And so I've completely avoided your question of how companies do about this, but really my mindset, I think the consumers are actually going to have to speak to what we want and what we want to do with that.
I think you actually do bring up a good point, which is to say, I think maybe strategically what companies ought to think about is that value exchange, right? That's what it really comes down to is what are you going to offer me in exchange for you keeping or leveraging my data? Is that really worth it, right? Like I think this idea that you're just collecting data on me for the sake of collecting data on me is not going to fly anymore. And I think people are getting savvy to that. But to your point, you do end up with degraded experiences, fundamentally degraded experiences, if you don't allow them to track anything. Yeah. The thing is, I'd say it's really easy for organizations to veer too far the other way, which is to say we don't want to collect any data. It's to the point. It's hard. It's complicated. We're not sure how to do it. We've seen some pretty serious fines in this space for violating data privacy. We've seen, for example, the FTC, they imposed, a $5 billion fine on Meta, Facebook at that time, for violations. We've seen examples where GDPR fines are, again, massive because it's $20 million or 4% of global annual revenue, whichever is higher, not smaller, whichever of those is higher, that's the minimum penalty. So again, I think you're seeing some really big consequences for not doing it. So then the question becomes like, is the value really there? Yeah. And I think that's where consumers will have to speak to it, to your point. They will have to talk to like, this is a worse experience. And this becomes a really important point for how, as an organization, are you measuring your customer actual satisfaction and engagement? And survey is probably not the most effective way to do that. It's actually through revealed preferences, their actual analytics behavior. What are they doing? Do they like it? Do they not like it? And I think that is going to be the differentiator moving forward.
Yeah. I 100% agree on the value exchange comment, Vincent, that people are going to have to make it so that you are willing to give that data because of what you get. But I think companies generally take two tracks down that path, which is the first track is the one I think customers hate. And it's probably something we would advise against, which is intentionally degrade the experience until you give it to me. And that's, it's the data version of the paywall, on a site, which people really, really hate. The other one is to make the service so fantastic, right, that everyone wants to use it, and then they don't mind giving it to you, right? And I think that's what if you look at let's take the iPhone for example. The service was so the features were so great. Now, like it can remind you. The one feature I use on the iPhone, which I know it gives them permission to stalk me, and it's a little creepy, but just to know, like look to my calendar and say, like, because I, have meetings around, or I have to get to an airport, and to know when I need to leave, and so that ability is worth me turning on and letting them track my GPS, just to know when I need to leave based on traffic. And so, that is, I think, a better way to look at it. It's like, let's make the service so valuable that people want to sign up and allow these things.
And then on that, I mean, I think that then we have to figure out, working in this integrated ecosystem of, like, how do we communicate to what that is and what that looks like. And I think not only around what you allow and understanding that, I think it's interesting thinking about it from a paywall perspective too. It's possible that there would be monetary considerations around, are you willing to pay to be in an environment where, hey, I'll let you track certain behaviors that lead to certain things, but I don't want these behaviors. And then again, how would we do that? How would we work through that? And because I think that could be a whole interesting different business model, frankly, to be like, I'm just thinking, traditional, kind of. Just think of a site where you're selling a lot of banner type, all the different types of advertisements and working through that. Like, and I'm not willing to actually pay the 99 cents for USA Today to make me to have it free, even though they remind me every single time. But at some point, maybe I would, or how would I actually explain to where the value of that, and get in ways that, no, I'm actually interested in that. And so, and then you have to understand what's the economics. Again, it goes back to the original question: why is Google and other companies not change where it is such a much big part of their business model? Where is it going to be to where that flips as well? And I think for probably some of your larger firms that you're seeing this both in terms of selling and buying, they're a little bit of like, well, who else are you going to use, right? I mean, so it's like, they're not incented to change. Where, it's part of Apple and others. That's part of their mission of what they're doing. So,
yeah, I think that'll end up being a big strategic differentiator. To your point, Jason, look, I let Apple have everything, and I let them have it because they've promised me implicitly by their value prop to me as a consumer that they value privacy, and that's sort of their fundamental human right from their perspective. And so while they collect my information, they collect my location, they have all my files, they have all my emails, they have all my photos, I'm actually reasonably confident that they're not leveraging that in ways that is not value accretive to me personally. And even in cases where they are, they're doing that in a rather considerate way. And so I think from that standpoint, I quite like them. Similarly, but opposite, I bought a TV a few years ago, and I installed the TV, and of course I opted out of everything because I paid a lot of money for the TV, and I don't really want them collecting my data, frankly. They don't need to know what I'm watching. And what was remarkable is that while I opted out of everything, there was an update that came, and I installed it. No real, nothing abnormal, just kind of an automatic update. And what was fascinating is all of a sudden I have a firewall, and my firewall started alerting me. There was a bunch of data trying to exfil from my house from this device that typically didn't exfil data. So I went and I looked more carefully, and the update, guess what it did? It opted me right back into everything I just opted out of. And there was no warning, there was no consent. It's probably illegal. Probably somebody will sue at some point. But look, the point is, like, it left a really bitter taste in my mouth. I didn't buy the really cheap TV, from whatever store. I won't name any big box stores here, but like from whatever store that was, half the price because they're effectively selling your data. They're using that as an advertising platform to collect and then sell and monetize, and that's what you're paying for. And so again, I'm fine with that business model. They should be more explicit about it. But in this case, there was no option. In fact, related, as we talked about last time, I actually bought a new car recently. And in this car, it has some
TV.
It has a TV, yeah, probably. It actually has, some self-driving capability in it. What was fascinating when I was going through and using going through all of the EULAs and agreements that you have to do to get stuff working, there is no way to opt out of that data collection. If you opt out, they intentionally degrade the experience. Now, do they need my data, my location in perpetuity in order to deliver that experience? No. So what they've done is exactly what you said, Jason. They have intentionally degraded the experience. By the way, an experience that I paid a lot of money for that functionality. They've intentionally degraded it and forced me then to surrender my data back to them. And I think those are the experiences where, again, like, I'm actually quite upset about it. it's probably not a lot I can do about it, frankly, but like it really does leave a sour taste in my mouth from those kinds of things. And I think that will be something that, I warn other people about now, and that I will definitely factor into future buying decisions. And I think that those things are the things that I think will ultimately how consumers will speak with their wallet, as they always do. The challenge is that I'm a reasonably interested, savvy person when it comes to data and privacy, and so I paid attention. I think most people wouldn't. And that's where the real risk is, I think. If you can go, by the way, you can go online, thanks to CCPA and some other rules, you can basically figure out what data people have on you. You can just request it. Now, it's incredibly bureaucratic and Byzantine by design, because they don't really want you requesting it, but you can go to like LexisNexis, for example, and you can request everything they have on you. You get a variety of these firms and ask them to be forgotten, to your point, Jason. And I think it's really fascinating. I think when consumers do that, their eyes are a little bit wider. Again, to the point, if it's my car, like it knows where I work, it knows where I live, it knows where I eat, it knows where like I go visit friends, it knows what time of day, how fast I go, like it knows all these stats about me. It would be great for an insurance provider. It'd be great for a variety of people in that ecosystem, but there's just no way to opt out. And so I think that's where, depending on the experience you choose as a brand, it'll sort of dictate the type of customers and experiences they have.
Well, I think you've got that scenario. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Jason.
It is interesting. It is we do, shameless plug for Credera. We do a lot of these kind of first-party data implementations, which they're surprisingly complex, right? Because you get all this data and, you sign up on one platform with, and another platform and another platform. Most companies don't have all of that connected internally, and then they have what they, may have purchased about you, and like figuring out that this is really Vincent is a little challenging. And again, then going out to all those sources and saying, this is what we have and this is how we use it, or everybody needs to forget this person, again, challenging. But we do, a lot of those implementations. And it's always shocking to me the volume of requests through those systems, which is almost nothing. Tiny fractions, but it is also growing. It's growing pretty rapidly, right? But it's starting real small, but I can see it, becoming with the growth rates becoming a significant. So I think people are becoming more and more aware of it.
Two thoughts that are coming through my mind is, one, you think about the opt-out process, whether it be in the case with your TV or your car, and the one that's a funny one that's in my household is that like all my bank statements, I like one in paper, and the rest I'm fine being electronic, and I have to get every single second I get reminder, I get opt in and opt out. I just want this one, I'm spending more time worried about it. But to me, similar to the experience, I'm like, why can't you just keep my preferences in every single time? Or, a scenario where, I've opted out of a website, but then every time I go back into the website, or every third or fourth time, right, I have to go back through the same reject queue. And, which then leads me down to a path of, I wonder, not to maybe use the same kind of cookieless language or a profile, like, are we going to start having profiles associated that say, hey, I'm going to be able to say on my browser or whatever tool I want to use, you probably already can do this, but like, here's all the things I'm willing to accept for these type companies. How's that play through? And so now, instead of me having to go reject and unreject every single time, just like I have a fast pass, I'm already got some scenario that sets that up. And that would then allow companies potentially to, tailor their experience to what they, why they'd want to use it. And, I think it has to start to go down this path to where we're going to have to tell people why we want to use the data. And yeah, it's going to mean some companies are going to hurt from that, but for many of us, I think we actually do want our data shared. We do like these experiences. It's just, I want to have more control of what they are. And I want to avoid the lawyers. I mean, I keep going back to mom on that theme, but I just think it's so much driven what we're trying to do. I mean, just even thinking about the money, I sold a fair amount of GDPR services, and that was for this brief period of time. And you had this big, then it kind of goes away. And well, what was the real purpose of that? Was it to actually protect anyone? Was it really because we had to go do that? And I think it's going to be something about our people that are listening. What do I do about for my company? I think it's partly, unless you're advertising, so that's a whole different element of that. But if you're thinking for a normal company, it's really around how do you treat these, the way that you collect that and use that is really the integrity of how you interact with your customer. It's extending the customer experience beyond just even simply how I interface with you. it's what I do with that, and it's part of your brand promise. You talked about Apple. I think that's really key, and I think it's ways for companies to really start to monetize what they do with that, and then the benefits. But it's going to take a while to work through that. And,
I think that's right. I guess, Jason, from your standpoint, as Kevin's saying, look, there's going to be some degraded experiences for people opting out. If you think about your sort of normal size brand, you're not an Amazon of the world. You have relatively limited data in a first party context. Like, what are sort of the technological solutions that you're seeing deployed to help overcome the deprecation of third party cookies?
I think it's largely a lot of the first party data collection. People, as I said before, you have your website, your app, all of these different points that, call center, when you make a payment or a transaction, your billing portal, whatever, those all tend to be separate systems internally. And, they're, at least from like a marketing and, customer facing experience, they've not worried too much about those. And we've chronicled that, issue here all the time about, you buy a car. I think I've told the story. I took my car in for service. 2 days later, I got a note from them saying, like, do you want to take your car in for service? And, it's just because none of those systems were connected. They would always they could do a lot of what they wanted to do around personalization and driving experience from the third party data. Without that, they're like really focused on, connecting those systems, understand like, all right, well, what first party do we have and how do we essentially replace that third party data with our own first party data, which, by the way, is the absolute right strategy. It's absolutely the right thing to do. And it is also much higher quality data, because if someone is giving you their address, you'd be really, for you to ship their new phone to you, you could be relatively certain that that's their address, right?
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, which is to the car example. The funny or ironic part of that is they were probably buying third-party data to figure out, about your car. Like, when did you buy it? How many miles do people in that region typically drive? And doing some basic math on the back end. When in reality, they know from telematics, they're already capturing from your car exactly how many miles are on your car, and they know from their service data exactly when you were last there. And so it's actually a really funny example where people became reliant on third parties to solve all the problems, even though they had everything to solve it themselves. And so, sort of,
I actually think, Vincent, that like what you just said is very salient. Like, they relied on third parties even though they had the first party data. I actually think not just in that example, that is generally true. If they can connect all the dots, that is just a lot of effort. And it was always, kind of the cheap fast food version, right, to go out and get third party data to get something done. And, again, that not necessarily the wrong answer to get something done, quick and dirty out, but, you have to then follow up with the activities internally to really get that first party data in order. Now, the people are being forced to now is essentially the big change. But I do think if you do it well and you design, Kevin, I think what you said was exactly right around thinking about that consent and as part of the customer experience, not something that you have to do in order to drive the customer experience. That's my words, not yours, but thinking about that whole experience and getting that done right, getting that data connected right, then I think you can get the even greater value out of your data than through some of these third-party sources.
So then, if we piggyback on that, continue with the car experience, part of it, this is more for our business and marketing, listeners, but around the perspective of like rethinking what is your channel strategy and your advertising approach, and saying, well, hey, I'm going to beef up some of my data and my advertising, my marketing expense going back towards first party data sources, explaining what that is versus really the phishing, which is really a lot of the third party. You think about that, how many different ways. I mean, I think even the fact that we all can instantly visualize that, that experience around service in our cars and how many different ways we get communicated around that. It's clearly people are spending money where they don't need to do that. And probably a few Credera clients are spending more money than they need to on that. But so I think it's going to be interesting around how we actually help, how you actually think about that, how you would help advise your clients to be thinking about where do they do that. Be curious around what's the quid pro quo from a consumer. I mean, do you start buying data? I mean, do you think about the old Nielsen text, telephone station boxes, right? Or I'm sure that, how do you do that? And you actually think about it more as a real marketplace where you'd be willing to provide that data in a way that's authentic. What would be willing to do that? There's a lot of different ways that this. Interesting to see where this is going to go, and I actually do ultimately think, similar to a lot of data security and privacy stuff, outside of, for the most people, until you've had fraud or you've been hacked. I mean, most people are probably going to be realizing for them that I'd rather just give it away than deal with having to control it. But I think it's going to be interesting for how to really think through that, and so. We're not all.
Kevin, you mentioned something a second ago that was interesting to me about the, externalizing that. There have been several efforts in the past. There was a company called OneID and others that have tried to essentially make the digital version of your driver's license, whether it be on your browser or a third-party site. I mean, it's kind of how the login with Google, login with Facebook work. They hold your data. You say, I want to log in with Google. Google, they exchange some data with Google and about who you are. But then Google will ask you, hey, what of your data would you like for us to share, or Meta or whomever would share with the site? Or they're requesting that they get your name and their phone number and whatever. Are you okay with sharing that? And so there have been a couple of attempts at companies who provide that kind of third-party universal ID. They've never, they've all, gone by the wayside. I think for two reasons. One, Google, Facebook introduced that feature somewhat as a defensive mechanism because, it looks close enough, right, to the end consumer. But it's essentially the same functionality, but it's going to Google or Facebook and not, this company that's entirely geared around your private ID. But second is, I think companies themselves didn't want to support that because they want to have that data about you, right? But I wonder, and just this is something I wonder, if that all of this isn't going to, drive I think there have been kind of two waves at that idea. In the past, if this isn't going to drive a third wave of that single university identity provider, right? I think VeriSign tried to do it a few years ago, with a certificate base, it was too complicated for for the average user, I think, to do that. But I do think that it's a very elegant and efficient technical solution. Right, which doesn't always make great business solutions, obviously, but interested for your thoughts on those type of businesses.
I mean, I think Apple's already working towards that, no doubt. I mean, if you look at the idea of hide my email as one of their premium iCloud features, which I love. Every single domain now that I use has a different email address. They make it seamless, effortless. I was already doing a lot of that with plus sign annotating. So you can take an email. Most email providers, you can take an email address, you can plus and then add whatever thing. So I could sort of track who is using it. But this was far better because it gives you sort of real control. It's really hard to correlate those things back together, especially because if you use them just on one site, you basically are stuck then at that point. And so, you know, as you start using services like that, which I use everywhere now, of course, everybody has some password manager. This becomes relatively easy then to manage collectively, even if you're not using Apple's, but whoever's. And then I think even for the sake of when you sign in with Apple, they'll often let you choose, what name, what email address, what phone number do you want to provide? And so I can imagine a world where they just keep creating more of the same type services for your phone numbers. I keep looking for one. This would be great, right? Every site I have, I use a different phone number and they'll figure out how to keep them separated. Or every site I go to, I use a different credit card number for that one transaction. So that really eliminates fraud in some sense. And Apple Pay does that for you effectively. That's sort of a really elegant solution towards this thing. So I think we'll keep going towards that. I think the question then becomes, you know, who is that ultimate provider? That'll be interesting to watch. But like more importantly, what are the value props they're offering their consumers? So again, I said, I give everything to Apple because privacy is a fundamental human right in their mind. And so they're reasonably secure with that. Google does similar things, but took the opposite stance of saying, hey, we're going to have these really great personalized experiences. We're going to read all your emails, but then we'll automatically fill out your calendar for you. We'll do all this sort of things for you from that standpoint. And I think that we'll see how that plays out. I think it'll come down to a lot of just consumer choice. And then what can you do on the edge, like on the devices themselves, versus having to push stuff back to the cloud. I think Apple continues to sort of push the bounds of what's possible there. And same with secure video that they have, right? So these things are videos that have all the AI functionality you'd want from video, like alerting, identification of people, labeling, but it's done locally in your house. Now they get to sell an extra device to go do that for you, so good for them. But the beauty as a consumer is that now the data never leaves your house and it's end-to-end encrypted, so they can't read it if they wanted to. And so I think that'll be, we'll see what happens, but I think that's maybe the way it goes from my standpoint.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be building off the Apple side of that. Around, will you start having like almost data consolidation plays? Yeah. And again, Apple's done some services; they're able to protect that, but you can see either companies buying other companies, other things, trying to own the whole supply chain. So they have that.
Look at Walmart's purchase of Vizio as an example.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's going to be curious. So again, which is going to be then the bigger are going to get bigger. How's that going to play out? How that's going to be against other different elements. But again, some of these games have always been happening, right? You're trying to outrun the next thing, but it is intriguing to see about where do you start to have one or two trusted, fully vertical type solution providers that have all, and that's this is where I'm going to go. I didn't think about having a bunch of different credit cards. That's one different way to do it, but is it kind of curious on how we think about that from a consumer perspective?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think that from the standpoint of smaller companies, I don't mean small. I mean even Fortune 500, but you're not one of these major data players. The question becomes, what do you do about it? And so, we've seen, to your point, Jason, we have to get better about using the data we have, our own first-party data. But there are effectively consortiums being built that then share data independently. So it used to be one-to-many. Effectively, you'd have one data aggregator getting all this data and then selling it back to each person. I think now you're seeing sort of pairwise many-to-many connections sort of enabled through clean rooms. And maybe, Jason, you want to talk a little bit more about clean rooms and how they work and what that functionality enables.
Clean rooms are a way for two companies to share data without really sharing data, if that makes sense. They, if you have information about customers and you have information, Kevin has information about customers, it would allow you to, say something like, "Hey, Kevin, show me everybody that has this email address or." Lives at this zip code, and get that without actually ever sharing any of the information with them. Let's say you were going to send, you were going to buy a bunch of ads on Google, right? And you could go in there and into the clean room and say, here are a bunch of people, target people like this, but not actually provide the data to them, right? So normally you do that by sending them the data, and then or other third parties the data, and then they have a copy of it. This uses some math basically to learnings and insights and other information without actually sending copies of the data.
Well, I think effectively, look, it is sort of a way of organizations taking and enriching their data, taking those lessons learned in some sort of neutral third sort of off-site, if you will, from either of those two companies, sort of think of it like an intermediary, and then take the insights back to their own environment without actually taking any of the data back to their environment. So you can sort of get the best of both worlds, at least conceptually. Here's all my data, here's all your data, we're going to put them in some safe room that nothing leaves effectively, but for aggregated learnings from combining our data. And so again, to the point, what you can end up with is this world where we end up sort of aggregating data across lots of different companies simultaneously through these partnerships effectively, where I'll share my data with you, you'll share your data with me, maybe it's mutually beneficial, maybe one of us pays the other one, but it becomes this mechanism to enrich data when you only have access to basically first-party data. I did the other solution that we're seeing a lot of these days, and I'm curious from your perspective, good, bad, or otherwise, which is around fingerprinting. And so again, we've talked about how people typically track you, and that is through cookies, but there's actually a whole other set of technology and solutions around fingerprinting. Do you want to talk some about that, Jason, and just what makes it so difficult?
I have a fingerprinting gone bad. I have a fingerprinting gone bad story. Yeah, a fingerprint basically looks at a lot of, when you make a request to a website, you send a lot of data, like what operating system is my device using, what's my IP address, right? What version of Mac OS am I using? What version of a browser am I using? All of this data goes up, in the request to the website, and that's so that they can, it's a bit of a legacy construct, but it used to be necessary, right? So, back before, let's say, JavaScript was really standardized across all of the platforms, you had to have different, code a lot of times that went down to different browsers on different operating systems, and that was a way to look at them. The user agent, right, is what that data is called, and say, okay, I need to send this code because it's on Apple, or this code because it's on Microsoft and Explorer. But there's a lot of that data in the request, and they can essentially make a fingerprint out of it. That that's you're fairly unique in the set of machines you use and versions of software you use and IP addresses you connect from, and that kind of thing, and they can use as a fingerprint. Now, my fingerprint gone wrong story is I went. A site, I will not mention the site, but I had definitely implemented it, and they had implemented it when I was Vincent. You and I were in Germany last month, and so I went to the site, and it recognized me as in Germany, and it came back. And now when I go to that site, I cannot get it to give it to me in English. Like every single time, it believes I'm German. And so there's, it's driving me. I've actually sent in a contact, and they basically got a response back like, yeah, we don't know how to change it. And so like they are useful. They are, I think we shouldn't judge them by a bad implementation of fingerprinting, but it is a technology, but I think even the fingerprints are going to be treated like cookies. They're getting harder and harder to do. Things like the VPNs, Apple can do this like on your phone now, that where it hides your, a lot of times you'll see we're hiding your IP address. Like really that is meant to stop fingerprinting. And so, yeah, I think it was an interesting idea to continue to try to do some of the third-party data collection without the cookies. I think most of the implementations have pretty quickly made it not a great solution. Doesn't mean it won't continue to evolve and play some role in an overall solutions. I think it will play some role, but I don't think it's going to be a holistic solution for cookies.
Yeah, I think it's really right. And again, if you think about the sort of simplest and earliest implementations of cookies, right, it was just meant to be a durable user ID. So like you drop a cookie with an ID, then if you show up again, I know who you are. As those become more difficult, there are other ways, and to your point, you sort of look at the combination of unique attributes like what browser, what time zone, what OS are you using, what's your actual amount of memory, what's your screen size. Sort of all of these things together, what plugins do you have is another one that's often used, right? As all these things together effectively uniquely identify you without you doing work. You can go check it out yourself, by the way, if you go to coveryourtracks.eff.org. This is put out by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and they actually will just show you sort of what your fingerprint is. They'll show you what the probability of people in the universe having that across your devices, so you can get some sense of how secure or not you are. It's kind of a neat website. But to your point, I think that we're seeing people sort of struggle with like, look, do I drop any cookie? Do I drop no cookie? Do I fingerprint instead? What do I do, across these different domains? And I think, look, at the end of the day, you have to personalize your experiences. I'm not disagreeing with that. But if you're doing it for the sake of just selling your data to other people through a clean room solution or through a more traditional data broker, we've done a fair amount of these monetization exercises, and frankly, like there is money there. Don't get me. There's tens of millions of dollars that you can make by doing that if you have real scale. However, every time we've done one, we've actually had more lucrative revenue generating opportunities by creating different experiences by leveraging your own first party data. And so, my encouragement would be, yes, you need the personalized experiences. Yes, you need to have first party sort of collection of data. You need to get good at that. I think this is historically done out of the CMO's remit and charter, but you probably need to pull in your CIO, your CTO. You need to bring some technology into the mix to help you solve some of the data problems that are going to traverse your organization. And this goes back to the thing we've talked about many times with AI, which is that you're going to have to start aggregating and consolidating your data across your own company to really get the value. And then lastly, I mean, I would just be really open-minded about the ways you could monetize that data. Because again, we've seen time and time again that really even very obvious people, you're like, well, they must sell their data, that'd be really valuable. It turns out that, yes, it's valuable. However, if instead they spent that same energy, that same money, that same effort to go create net new offerings, we've seen that just becomes a far more lucrative and frankly, like rewarding experience, I think, for all parties involved, from the consumer to the CMO directly. So I don't know, anything to add to that, Kevin, in terms of strategy and companies and thinking about that, or you, Jason, on technology?
I would just say that if our listeners have made it through this far in our podcast, I hope it was interesting.
Touche.
Well, I would say it's probably not a binary answer. It's, to use the 80-20 rule, if we were doing 80% third party and 20% first party, like it may shift to, 80% first party. Like whether it be third party, or fingerprinting or clean rooms, like there's always going to be, depending on the use case, and we always take a use case driven design. What's the right solution for that? There will always be some need for that. But I do agree that the vast majority of the value will come from figuring out how to harness your first party data. And that means putting some to your point about the CIO, some foundations in place, foundational infrastructure around, having good, clean data governance and consents and those type things. So it is I think a super, I know we've been on AI, the AI topic for the last, I don't know, I've forgotten how many podcasts now, but I think it is super important to bring up right now, just because, and remind people of it, because there is, I think, a ton of value out of it, and you do need to get started. And back to the AI topic, if you're going to do good or do well with AI, you need that as well. Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself. See, everything's back to AI, Jason. That's the moral of the story here. Stop fighting it. Just embrace it.
That's a data scientist.
Shameless plug. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, listen, thank you guys so much for joining me today. We're going to have a GoFundMe page for Jason and lighting. We're going to get him a new light here for his office at home, so you can actually see his face next time. Just check out the GoFundMe.
Keeps on using the money we give him to buy bait, though.
That's how he caught the fish hanging up on the wall there. No, seriously, though, thank you, listeners, for joining today. For those of you that would like to learn more, please visit the insights page at Credera.com. Again, thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.